welcome back to my show, Conversations with a Piano Pro. Today's Piano Pro is Isaac Wynn. Hey, Isaac, thank you so much for joining.
Pleasure's all mine.
Um,
Thanks, Yukimi.
thank, thank you. He's an excellent piano technician and he's an entrepreneur who started the company called Arolla Piano Co, which is a piano tuning company based in New York City as well as Tucson, Arizona area.
Right.
And yeah, right. And then he's also a musician. He's into music technology. So today's topic is about piano mechanism and tuning. And Isaac is going to show us what's inside of the piano and what it takes to be a piano technician. And also that he will lecture us how important it is to maintain this beautiful instrument, piano, on a regular basis. So thank you, Isaac, once again.
Thank you.
All right. Yeah, how are you doing today?
Good. Excellent. It's a beautiful sunny day here in Tucson. I've been out here for about 2 years now after doing my piano tech apprenticeship in Brooklyn and all over New York City, where I built up this business and built up a team. So we still have an active team in New York City, but these days I personally am living in Tucson, Arizona. And this is a really nice time of year. The 100-degree days are finally down to like 90 degrees, which feels
Oh my
cool in
goodness.
comparison. But, works. So I think most people know, but just to cover it on a very basic level, you're pressing a key. Let's see if here's one that's visible. You press a key, it's a lever. The front goes down, the back end goes up and presses on a grand piano up on a hammer that flies up, hits the strings, the string vibrates. Those vibrations then go down into the soundboard, which is this big piece of wood underneath the strings. It's, people refer to it as an amplifier. It's technically a transducer, but the effect is it makes the sound louder, fills the room and our souls with music.
Yeah.
That's the really basic version: key, hammer, string, soundboard, sound. I think people know that, but it's still important to cover. Now, what most people don't know if they're not piano technicians or advanced pianists, I know you, Yukimi, being a really experienced pro at those higher levels, most really refined pianists that I've met know something about piano mechanics. They want to know exactly what they're feeling when they press down on the keys with more precision about exactly what's happening. So they probably know terms like escapement or let off. But outside of the pro level, most pianists I meet don't necessarily even know any of those terms, and I didn't know them before I became a piano technician. So it's normal, but it's also kind of funny because, as it's often said, pianists know the least about the mechanics of their instrument out of all musicians. Like, if you're a cello player, you can probably change a string. Most pianists would never be able to change a string.
No, shame on us.
Well, I mean, it's complex. I don't want to say dangerous, but you can get hurt. There's a lot of tension here. There's sharp parts. More likely than you getting hurt, you're probably going to hurt the piano if you don't know what you're doing. So it does make sense, given how complex the instrument is, that a whole industry, a trade, has risen up of specialized piano technicians. So it makes sense, but I still think for pianists, it's useful to know more about what's going on, if only for intellectual interest, but also so when there's a problem, you can communicate better with your piano technician. Like, people will call me and say, I have a sticking key. And that can mean anything from I play the key and it keeps ringing out when it shouldn't, or the key's sticking down and it doesn't come back up, or any number of other things. And so as a piano technician, part of the art form is learning how to communicate with non-piano technicians, and that's really tricky if you don't have knowledge. So hopefully right now we'll get some of the basics covered and help out with that.
Sounds great, Isaac.
Tuning is that every string is connected to a pen. These are the tuning pens. Let's see, up here.
Yes.
And if you turn that pen clockwise, you're pulling the string further around the pen and increasing tension. And reverse if you go counterclockwise. And pitch changes with tension, right? So on a very basic level, that's what tuning a piano comes down to, is making sure that every single string is at the proper tension. And in case you didn't know, Yukimi, I'll quiz you. Roughly how many strings are there on a piano?
How many what?
Strings on a piano.
Oh my gosh. I know how many keys there are, but strings?
See?
I
Okay,
know.
so
Shame on
most
me.
people wouldn't know this.
I know.
So do you know how many strings there are per note?
I mean, the middle range has 3 strings per key. The lower range has 1.
And then there's an in-between, sort of the mid to high tenor has 2 strings per note, bichord. Single, double, and triple. So the reason I ask that, it's not as simple as just, many people know, oh, there's 3 strings per piano note, but it depends on the note. So it's not quite as simple as just multiplying 3 by 88 keys on the piano. The number is around 200. It depends on the piano because those points where it switches from 3 to 2 to 1 vary depending on piano design. But if you just keep the number 200 in your mind, you'll be about right. So there's around 200 strings on a piano.
Oh my goodness.
Each one has to be precisely adjusted for your piano to sound good. So that's why we always laugh as piano technicians when someone hasn't had a piano tuning before and they say, how long will you need? Like about 30 minutes? Can't tune a piano properly in 30 minutes. I can make it sound better in 30 minutes. If I only have 30 minutes, I can get something done and you might even be happy. But to really do it right, generally takes minimum hour, 90 minutes. If your piano is significantly out of tune and needs extra work, maybe 2 hours. Just FYI for people out there to know. This is the way to break it down in your mind if you're not familiar with the concepts and theories of piano tuning. So first of all, the instrument as a whole has a general tension level, right? All the strings can be generally looser or generally tighter. In other words, generally flatter pitch or generally sharper pitch. And that's the overall pitch level of the piano. And that should be at what we call concert pitch. In other words, in tune with the world of music. And the way we establish that is through A in the middle of the piano, A4. Quick side note here, this would be really useful for people from a communication level as well. Each octave has a number. So the first C on the piano is C1. Every note above that, for example, this G is G1, then it's G sharp 1 until we get to the next C, and that's C2. And then every note above that until the next C is that note name plus the number 2. So middle C would be C4 because it's the 4th C on the piano. That's a very simple system for naming notes. A lot of people don't know it, and it can be confusing when someone calls us and is talking over the phone about where the problems are. So I want to put that out there too. So A4 is the A above middle C, now you know, and it should be set to 440 hertz. Hertz is a measurement of frequency. Simple way to think about that is oscillation of molecules in the air between their most expanded state and most compressed state. And that happens 440 times per second at 440 hertz. So it's hard to imagine that fast of a movement, but that's what's going on when you hear an A4 at concert pitch. So
that's the standard in the world right now, right? A4.
I think there are some places, I think still in Europe, where people will do 442 or minor variations. Over time, it's gotten sharper and sharper. You know, hundreds of years ago, I think people were around like 430, and it's just gotten sharper and sharper over time. But the only thing you really need to remember is 440 hertz. At A4 is concert pitch. And we make all the other notes match to that. So if the piano, this is something people should know, if your piano overall is about 7% or more sharp or flat of concert pitch, we have to do what's called a pitch adjustment. And that's a rough tuning overshooting the mark. So let's say here's concert pitch, your piano's way down here. If we just went from the bass to the treble and tuned every string right up to this level, by the time we got to the treble, there would be a lot more tension on the piano, right? Because we've added tension to all those strings. It's pressing down on the soundboard. And the tension of the lower strings would go flat. So they were fine when we started. By the end, we added all this tension and it pressed the lower strings down. So a pitch adjustment, we overshoot the mark. So by the time we're done, everything's settled right to around concert pitch. And then we can fine tune it. So
that is mind-blowing.
It's important to know. Most people don't know about that. So if it's been over a year since your piano was tuned, you may need a pitch adjustment. And the simplest way to think of it is a rough tuning that gets the piano stabilized at concert pitch so you can fine tune. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So even to get to the point of tuning, you have to adjust that if your piano is so out of tune.
There's this, I don't know if you'd call it a joke, but it's an old cliche among piano tuners. You can't tune a piano until you tune it. Doesn't really make sense when you just hear it said out loud, but it does as a piano tuner. The closer it is to in tune, the more precise changes you can make that will actually stay where you put them. Because everything affects everything else, right? We have all this tension over the piano and everything affects everything else. So you can't tune a piano till you tune. So just in short, once we have the whole piano at concert pitch, A4 is at 440, now there's two elements to think about. One is how all the notes on the piano relate to each other. And then the other is how the strings of an individual note relate to each other. So simply put, when there's multiple strings per note, each one has to be at exactly the same tension and therefore pitch, right? And so that's what we call a unison. So I haven't tuned this piano in a second because I'm so busy tuning other people's pianos. So I'm sure we can find a unison that's not in very good tune. We'll see if it translates. Okay, so they're all a little off, but this one jumped out to me as the most. Listen for a whining sound. Sounds like a wow, wow. If you hear that movement in the tone, so that unison is out of tune, and we would want to check the individual strings of that and make sure they're all the same tension. Here, so just a quick demonstration. Let's put it more out of tune. Now you can really hear it's out of tune. Listen to how the tone changes as I bring it in. More of a straight line as it comes into tune. So that's unison tuning. Now the other factor is how do all the notes relate to each other? So A4, A3, do they sound good together? Well, first of all, the unisons have to be clean, but then also the octave has to match. This frequency on A3, this is a little bit more technical, but it should be half the frequency of A4 for it to be an octave lower. Right. So we're going to make sure that on a simple level, all the octaves, fifths, and fourths match up when we're tuning a given note. So if we've tuned every note lower and we're tuning A4 right now, we would check it with A3, we check it with D4, E4, and then we can use other intervals we call fast beating intervals. So all these intervals are slow beating. They're consonant intervals, octaves, fifths, and fourths. They're the most pure intervals in music. Then fast beating intervals would be thirds and sixths. Now, I haven't explained what beating is. Beating is what you heard a second ago in that unison where we heard an oscillation, like wah, 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 that got slower and slower. That's beating. So it'll go wah, 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 as it comes into tune. And I probably won't get more technical than that unless you want me to. I'm just trying to give
no, this is plenty. Wow, great. No wonder when my piano goes out of tune, it's like it doesn't sound like piano anymore, you know? Yeah.
That's the pitches, the frequencies of those strings coming what we call in and out of phase. So they're one rate is a little bit faster than another. So every once in a while they'll line up. It's almost like if you've ever been in traffic. I guess this metaphor might not be as useful for New York. I didn't in New York at all when I lived in New York, but I think it'll be useful for enough people. If you've ever been in traffic and you see the blinker of the person in front of you and your blinker, and every once in a while they line up and then they go out of sync. Right. Does it make sense? So that's kind of what's happening here. Is every once in a while they're going to line up at their different rates, and then it'll sound good, but then they're going to go back out, and that's how you hear that change. That wow, a simple metaphorical level.
Especially, I noticed that in the middle range.
Sure.
Yeah, I guess because you use that range a lot. Is that why?
That's one, and then the other one relates to humidity, which I know we'll talk about later, but just a sneak preview of that. Humidity, water moisture in the air has a huge effect on pianos in many different ways because they're made of so many parts that are wood, and wood soaks up moisture when it's high humidity and releases moisture when it's low humidity. But the soundboard, that big sheet of wood I was talking about underneath the strings is a big one because when the humidity goes up, it swells and presses up on the strings, and then when it goes down, it releases tension. And that constant change in tension puts your piano out of tune more than anything else, unless there's something wrong with your piano. But assuming there's not loose pens or something else wrong, that's the number one culprit for a piano going out of tune, even more than playing.
More than what? I'm sorry?
More than playing. If the piano's in good shape and it's tuned properly, yeah, if you really bang on it, of course, it's going to put it out of tune over time.
Right.
But, so to wrap this up in terms of tuning, so to recap, we need the 3 or 2 strings of each individual note to be the same tension, in tune with each other. And then we need the relationship between all the different notes to be proper. So the simplest way to think of it is if we have one note we're tuning and all the notes below it we've already set, we have to make sure it matches up to the octave, fifth, and fourth beneath it. When it matches up to all those, it's probably in about the right spot. And then there's other techniques we use to refine it even more, which probably too tricky to explain right now. But
Yes.
the idea is modern piano tuners use a combination of electronic devices to take measurements and make predictions about where notes should be, and their ear. You can't do it with just electronics, to really fine tune and achieve these two factors. The relationship between all the separate notes is good. So intervals sound good, and then the strings of an individual note are the same tension. So each unison sounds pure. Number one, you have to, of course, love music and be fascinated by piano. You have a love for pianos.
Yeah.
You don't have to have, a lot of people have the misperception that you either have to have perfect pitch, so you can hear a note and immediately name the pitch of that note, and or have really unusually high hearing acuity. And neither one is true. In fact,
really?
Yeah, that could be a detriment to piano tuners because every person is a little different. So any given three people with perfect pitch, each person could name the note you play, but each person would have a slightly different sense of exactly how sharp or flat it should be. There's a range that would still be detectable as A4, for example.
Right.
And you have to overcome that as a piano technician because you have to, this gets into a bigger topic, but each piano is tuned a little differently. It's not like you can just have a set frequency for each note and tune it. At A440, yes, we set that to A440, but then we have something called stretch, which, without getting too technical, the higher notes of the piano are actually tuned a little sharper than exact mathematical multiples, and the bass notes are actually tuned a little flatter. I have to be technical to explain why, but if you don't do that, it doesn't sound good at all. And the amount of stretch you have to put on the piano depends on the construction of that piano. So every piano has to be tuned a little bit differently. So if you have perfect
complicated,
that could throw you off. Does that make sense?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, it makes sense.
You don't need perfect pitch. And in terms of hearing acuity, they did tests on piano tuners, and they have average hearing acuity in terms of like how quiet of a sound you could hear, how far away or whatnot. What it really is developing a really intimate understanding of tone and pitch, so you know what you're listening to, a mental map, so to speak, of what you're hearing. And that just takes training. So the final thing beyond just loving pianos that you need to be a piano technician is just a lot of dedication, just like learning to play the piano at a high level, because it is just like learning to play the piano, a marriage of intellectual theory, knowing what you're listening to, and muscle skills, knowing how to achieve it. So instead of a really refined touch and tactile acuity like a pianist has to have, we have this connection between our ear and the way we're moving the pens, and that has to be developed through time. It's not like just memorizing a passage out of a book, it's muscle memory. So your body has to be trained to achieve what your mind has learned. So it's just a lot of dedication. It's like the 10,000 hour mastery rule you've probably heard about. They say you have to put just as much time into tuning pianos to be a good piano tuner as you have to put into playing the piano to be a good pianist. So I think any pianist who's watching this could relate in that way.
Yeah.
Do that. Okay, so to recap, the key is a lever. You press the front down, it pushes the hammer up, the hammer hits the strings, they vibrate, the vibrations go into the soundboard, amplified in the room so we can hear it. We talked about tuning, changing the tension of the strings via turning the pegs to make sure that everything matches up and sounds great. Now, we want to drill down a little bit deeper and see what's actually happening in between the key moving and the hammer moving. Most, I would say, at least a good portion of pianists understand key and hammer and strings, right? But what actually happens in between is where it gets complex. So what we're going to do today is pull the action out of this Yamaha G1 and just give you a quick walkthrough on action mechanics. So you'll have to bear with me. It'll take a second. We can see things a little bit better now. I'm going to just kind of give you the overview and then we'll drill a little bit deeper. So, okay, now you can see what's really going on inside more. So here's the key, it's a lever. The fulcrum point is in the center. We call this the balance rail. And then the back end of the key, you can't really see it, but it's pressing up. Well, you can a little bit right there on the bottom of this piece, which is called the whipping.
What is it again?
The whipping.
Whipping.
It's a whipping action, sort of W-I-P-P-E-N. Yeah, the whipping. So it's one to remember when we talk about piano mechanics. Here, I'll come down to your level. There we go. The whipping is really important because as you can see, I know we're not super close up, but there's a lot of little moving parts and pieces attached to this whipping, right? And so the whipping basically transfers this simple up and down motion of the back end of the key to various places to make various things happen. So we're turning one motion into a variety of motions. And when I first started tuning pianos, I thought, okay, nice, but it all seemed sort of random, and there's probably many different other ways you could devise this mechanism. Why do you need all that? And while that may be, what I've come to understand through time is the piano is a result of evolutionary pressures, just like anything else that evolves in the world. And its mechanism is devised to accomplish all these things we want as a player. So we'll step back for a second and just think about this trajectory through time. The piano comes, its great-great-great-grandparents sort of are plucked harps, right? Simple stringed instruments.
Sure.
And from there, we kind of fast forward up to the hammer dulcimer. If you know what that is, now we have strings stretched on a flat surface and you use little hammers with your hands to play the strings. Then we wanted to make that easier and get more volume. And so we have things like harpsichords and clavichords that either pluck the string or have a little tine that hits the string. But the issue there is that harpsichords and clavichords only have one volume level. And so we as human beings had this craving for a keyboard instrument. So the keys make it very easy to play. I mean, of course, you need a very, very high level of refined technique to be an excellent pianist. But on a basic level, like a baby can come up and press a key and make a sound, which they couldn't do with a cello or other instruments. So the idea was to make it very approachable, accessible to play, right? So we created this whole system with keys, moving hammers, just to make it easier and easier for people to approach playing the instrument. But those other two instruments, harpsichords and clavichords, only had one volume level. So we wanted something that had more of a range of expression. We had the ease of just being able to press a key, but we didn't want to lose out on the dynamic range of wind and brass and bowed stringed instruments, etc. So enter Bartolomeo Cristofori. In 1700, he invented the piano. And originally, as you probably know, it was called piano et forte, so soft and loud. So an instrument, a keyboard instrument that could play soft and loud. And that all came down to one key component of the whole processor. So you can see the hammer moving. It goes up, up, up. At some point, it pops back down a little bit, right?
Right.
So that's called escapement. If we didn't have escapement, the hammer would just jam against the string. Kind of like what happens with a clavichord with the tine just hitting the string. But we want it to be pressed up via all these mechanics and then at the last second, fly on its own momentum up towards the string.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And so that gives us much more of like, it's much like if you were playing a hammer dulcimer and you had a mallet you were hitting the dulcimer with, you'd probably have some tension in your muscles up until the last second, and then you would just let it bounce off the string, right?
Right. Yes.
Jam it against the string. So we needed to achieve that with piano mechanics. And that's the moment right there where the mechanics disengage and then the hammer flies up on its own momentum.
Wow.
And that's called let off or escapement. And the way it happens, this is going to be maybe tricky to see here, but I'll do my best. So this piece right here is called the jack. And you can see as the whipping is moving up, it's pressing on the hammer, what we call the knuckle here. So it's going up through and pressing on the knuckle right there, right? So you can see that part's pressing on the knuckle. At the last second, boom, it rotates forward. You see how it goes up and then rotates forward right there.
Oh, yeah. I see it. Yes.
Okay. So it's when it rotates forward, now it's no longer underneath the knuckle right there. It's getting out of the way. So at that moment, called let off or escapement, the mechanics beneath the hammer are no longer pressing up on the hammer, and it just flies on its own momentum, hits the string, and then comes back down to rest on the mechanics. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Wow. Thank
So
you
that's
so much.
what
Yeah.
he invented. Yeah, that's what Christopher invented. And I guess the last piece of that puzzle is, you can't really see it right there, but the way it rotates out, there's a little, we call it the let-off button, which
Mm.
is the jack. That piece I was talking about is shaped like this. Let-off button is here. So when the jack moves up, it contacts the toe of the jack, and then it rotates out of the way. So it's like this kind of movement, which gets this
Ah.
top part that's pressing on the hammer out of the way.
But with this system,
Yeah.
yeah, the sound resonates, and that's making this piano what it is.
More expressive, which is
Mm-hmm.
why harpsichord and clavichords aren't very popular these days, but the piano is very popular.
Mm-hmm.
So expressive.
Right.
So there's a lot of other things that happen via the whip-in motion, but just to keep it focused today, unless you have specific questions, the main thing I wanted to leave you with is the key transfers motion to the hammer via the whip-in and everything attached to it. But the most important part is the jack right here, which presses up on the hammer and gets out of the way right there at the last second, allowing the hammer to fly on its own velocity. And that means that you can play quietly or loudly, and the hammer will, change its velocity with which it hits the string, but it won't jam against the string.
Right.
So that's
Wow.
the basics of piano mechanics, grand piano mechanics at least. We have the same thing on an upright. Everything is now rotated vertically,
Right.
and we still have a hammer, we still have a whip-in, but some parts are changed, as you would assume, because no longer do we have gravity.
The gravity,
Pulling down
yes.
this plane. Now the hammer's moving this way, and we have gravity pulling down.
Right.
We still have a jack, we still have escapement, but it operates a little differently.
Mm-hmm. I know. So I've talked to my harpsichord friends, and she tuned her instrument every morning. Can you
Right.
imagine?
You have
Yes.
to. Yeah.
Yeah, with that instrument. I can't imagine. I know harpsichords has much less keys and then much less strings, but with piano, with 200 plus strings you have on this instrument, it's how often should we ask for tuner?
Great question. So yeah, it's not something I recommend the average person try to do themselves, just because it takes a long time to get good at. So I would hire a pro. It's going to be a lot easier for you. You'll get better results, and you only have to do it about twice a year. We recommend every 6 months. Of course, it depends on the context. If you're a performance venue, a recording studio, you're going to tune your piano before every performance to really dial it up. But for the average home pianist, you tune it every 6 months. You're going to be fine largely. You're going to avoid having to need those pitch adjustments. Now, one thing we do have to talk about in relation to this is humidity and seasons and how that affects pianos. Can we get into that now?
Oh, yes, please. Yes, I was going to ask.
Because that's intimately related with this whole thing about when and how often to tune your piano. So out here in Arizona, we're pretty stable throughout the year, except for monsoon season. And if you don't know about that, basically we have 5 seasons in Arizona. So the normal 4, but then monsoon season is kind of late summer, early fall, varies a little bit depending on the year. And we get these heavy rainstorms and thunderstorms, and the humidity goes way up. So for the rest of the year, it's pretty dry and consistent, and then the humidity spikes then. And as we mentioned before, humidity has a big impact on piano tuning because the soundboard, all that wood underneath the strings that resonates, swells with moisture and then releases moisture. And if it's moving around, it's going to change the tension of the strings because they're in contact with it through the bridge.
Of course.
Strings, bridges, soundboard is the basic structure. So anything that happens here moves the bridges, and the bridges are touching the strings. That moves string tension.
Yeah, of course.
So in Tucson, basically I have people tune their pianos. Ideally, like if your piano needs a tuning, don't worry about the season. You just call and get a tuning because it sounds bad then. But then if we're going to start taking care of our pianos regularly, like I encourage everyone to do, we want to try and get on a cycle that makes sense. So as I work with a client more and more here, I try and get them to tune it kind of after the monsoons have settled down, maybe around right now, and then 6 months from now. So April, March, April, and just get on that cycle as much as possible. Now, of course, I don't want to only work those 2 months of the year, and people need tunings other times. And so, just call when you need a tuning. If it sounds out of tune, we'll get it taken care of. But just remember that by and large, you do want to keep seasons in mind. You want to tune twice a year. Now, New York is different. New York, extremes in humidity and dryness.
Yes.
The winter's super dry, your skin gets all dry. The summer's really muggy, you're sweating,
Right.
and your piano feels the same kind of things. So you're going to see your piano go flat in the winter as the soundboard loses moisture and sinks down, sharp in the summer, swells up and presses on the strings. So the other factor is your home environment. If your piano is close to an outside wall, a window, a radiator, an AC unit, anything else that affects temperature and humidity, it's not going to be able to stay in tune well. So you want to pick a good location for your piano that's in a sort of ideally central, far away from window, far away from anything that's going to change temperature and humidity. That's where it's going to be most stable. Then beyond that, seasons are going to still affect it, but it's going to depend on the household, the construction of the building, etc. So every situation is different. The main thing is tune your piano every 6 months. If we notice that the piano seems really susceptible to humidity and is moving a lot, then we may recommend a piano humidifier. And that's something that can be installed in the piano. And it has both a humidifying and a dehumidifying component. It helps combat against what's happening in the ambient environment. And when the humidity is shooting up in the summer, it has a component that'll dry the piano out and keep it down to stable. And when it's dropping in the winter, there's a humidifying component that'll bring it back up to stable.
Wow.
So everything's unique topic.
So you're in Arizona, I'm in New York. So tell us about the differences between the New York pianos and Arizona pianos. I'm sure because I've heard Arizona, except for those monsoon season or whatever, I think pretty much the amount of humidity is stabilized, correct? Right, percentage. And New York, as we said, winter is super dry, and especially with the heater we have and radiator and whatnot, it gets super dry. And during the summer, impossibly humid, right? So, as a piano technician, do you find it that New York pianos are much harder to deal with?
They're certainly a bit more all over the map. We're doing a lot more pitch adjustments, like I talked about earlier, in New York, because the pianos are often deviating wildly from concert pitch due to these extreme fluctuations in humidity. Don't have to do as many here in Tucson unless the piano was tuned during a monsoon and then we're out of it, or it was tuned before a monsoon and then the rainstorms come and it drives it out. So New York is a lot more all over the map. And the main thing is we find ourselves installing a lot more humidity control systems in New York because you just can't get a piano stable humidity wise without those systems, which are made especially for pianos and are installed inside the piano. People often say like, oh, I have a humidifier in my house, but unless you have museum level humidity control in your environment, which just isn't achievable in pretty much anyone's home, you're not going to be able to stabilize your piano enough to avoid these pitch adjustments. So we install a lot more humidifiers in New York City. We do a lot more pitch adjustments. And then the other thing, there's a lot of really beautiful, really old pianos, 100 plus year old pianos in New York City. I mean, New York's a piano town. And some of them are in amazingly good condition given how old they are and a relative lack of care they've received over the decades. But I have found, it's been neat in the last couple of years being in the desert here, that there are also a lot of old, especially upright pianos. Like imagine an old upright piano in a saloon, honky-tonk saloon. And player pianos too, that are in remarkably good condition because the environment has been so stable here over the decades. So I do find older pianos in better condition more often here in the desert.
Interesting.
Yeah. I did my apprenticeship in New York City, took around 4 years, tuned pianos all over the boroughs, just a wide variety of different instruments and people and experiences, and it was an incredible adventure and I learned a lot. Around 2015, I became a registered piano technician, which is pretty much the only official certification available for piano technicians. And you have to pass 3 different tests: a knowledge test that's written, a technical exam that involves various repairs and adjustments under tight time limits to high standards that are evaluated by couple different examiners, and then a tuning exam, of course, where you have to tune a piano without any electronic aids, and then your tuning is evaluated for accuracy and stability, and you have time limits there too. So you pass all that. That's offered through the Piano Technicians Guild, which I've been a member of since probably 2012, 2013. And you can become an RPT, a registered piano technician. So I did that in 2015 and started this company. We had a name change about a year and a half ago due to, it's a long story, but we rebranded. So we've been known as Arolla Piano Co. Arolla is a Swiss pine tree that grows in the Swiss Alps, and a lot of my heritage is Swiss. So people ask about the name. It's Arolla, and it's this beautiful pine tree that grows in the Swiss Alps, and people prize its wood because it's incredibly aromatic, and it holds that aroma for hundreds of years even after the tree is cut down, and it has antibacterial, antifungal properties. So it's a really unique wood. It's not used in pianos, but it's a unique, strong wood, and the pine tree is a symbol of vitality and rebirth and things we aspire to. So Arolla Piano Co, that's the story behind the name. So in 2015, I founded the business on my own, of course, and about a year later, as we built up a clientele, I started bringing on apprentices to train and help out with various work. And we still have that program operating today in New York City. I don't have apprentices here in Tucson, but in New York, we have two technicians, Trevin and Julie, who are absolutely fantastic people, technicians, and they're working super hard, growing and learning every day. They work with the pianos of Brooklyn Music School, a lot of you may know, right downtown Brooklyn. And so we maintain all their pianos. They work all over the city, and I guide them on a daily basis, and they also work with more experienced technicians locally to continue their training and development. And then I'm here in Tucson building the business up here. I've been here about 2 years, and as of now, I can confidently say we have a steady client base here, and so we're operating at full steam in New York and Tucson. And if I'm not mistaken, we were the first multi-regional home piano service business of its type, specializing in home piano service business. States, that are very far apart. There's absolutely piano service businesses that will like operate in adjacent states. Your piano tuners will go to Connecticut, but I'm saying like Arizona, New York, totally different locations, specializing in home piano service, but also professional piano service. I work in concert halls, studios, etc. So it made that move in 2018, and here we are today. I think that's the whole story in a nutshell.
Amazing story. Thank you.
I have always been someone who's really erred on the side of caution. COVID is not something to play around with. It's a serious issue. It's incumbent upon each of us as individuals to take the precautions that not only protect ourselves, but help out society so we can all get through this sooner rather than later. And I really feel for so many professionals in various industries who have been put out of work or have had their work, drastically changed or diminished. Fortunately, as piano technicians, unlike many things, we're not able to work remotely. That would be the safest thing, right? If you're an accountant, for example, and you can work totally remotely. We have to come to your house and be at your piano. But unlike many other trades or different vocations that have to be in person, we can definitely socially distance very well. So you don't have to be in the room with us. It doesn't have to be a bunch of people in the house. It's just one technician showing up. We always wear masks. We can keep plenty of distance. And because of that, so far so good. We haven't had any issues with our clients or our technicians. And we're just about that. So we just keep distance. We ask that every single client wear a mask whenever they're in the same space as us. We wear masks the whole time. And then we just keep as much distance as possible. Like, we want to say hi at the beginning. If they point, still keeping some distance. And we need to say bye at the end. But in between, there's just no need to be close to each other. And with those simple precautions, and of course, washing hands before and after, we feel like we're being responsible and safe, and so far, so good.
Wonderful.
Please.
It's good to hear. So your business is full in operation.
Yeah, I mean, when COVID hit, we absolutely weren't. We just had to learn more about what was going on. But I think as much we still have to learn about COVID, the general consensus, the general consensus seems to be that the primary transmission is person to person through breath, through COVID particle coming through isolation, right? Not so much through surfaces. And so as long as we wear masks and we keep distances, we should be safe. So we just encourage everyone to do that no matter what you're doing. And we do it at every appointment, and we ask that you do it at every appointment too. Otherwise we won't serve your piano for our own sake as well as all of our other clients.
Right. It's just a simple thing, but it works. So let's put that mask on, then keep our lives going, right? Yeah.
Right.
So thank you for all these information. Wow. Well, I learned a lot actually. So I actually want to be your apprentice one of these days, and then want to learn how to tune the piano. Yeah. Thank you so much. And so for viewers, I encourage you to take care of your pianos on a regular basis, and I will include actually, Arolla Piano Co. information in the description section of this video, so you can make an appointment with, one of the piano tuners at the company. And so I really encourage you to do that ASAP, because especially for my students, some of your pianos are so out of tune, and every week it hurts my ear. So please take care of your pianos, and be sure to, and if you like this video, be sure to like this video, and also to please subscribe to our channel, and be sure to like our Facebook page and Instagram page. Thanks once again, Isaac, for joining us for this show, and I would like to talk to you once again, maybe in a few months or so, to see how you're doing. Yeah, thank you.
Deeper. Yeah, until next time. It was an absolute privilege being on. Thank you for letting me drone on about piano tech. I hope everyone learned something. And include the link below, ArollaPianoCo.com. You can book easily online, reach out via email or phone. We're always happy to talk piano. It doesn't cost you anything to ask questions or have conversations about pianos, and we'll get you booked up with a technician. But in the meanwhile, I hope everyone's staying safe and playing tons of music.
Thank you. Yes, exactly. And you have all the Facebook page and Instagram as well?
We do, yeah. We're not super active on social media these days, but we do have them. And we post pictures of pianos periodically. We tons of pianos. But the website is the main thing. We recently redesigned it. There's a super easy on booking system. So the best way to get in touch with us is go to the website, ArollaPianoCo.com. There's phone numbers there, emails even better, because we have multiple people on the team, and we get back to people, within 24 hours or less. So
all right,
go to the website, check it
I'll just make sure to list that in the description. Thank you, Isaac.
Thank you. An absolute pleasure.
Thank you so much. All right, so thank you for watching, and thank you for listening. I'll see you guys in the next episode. Bye for now.
Bye. Take it easy.